Good to go. Yes. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Sounds good. All right. All right. Welcome, everybody. Title of my talk here is No Refresh Needed, Lightning Apps with the Streaming API. So I submitted this talk, and it got accepted. And then shortly after, they announced Lightning Web Components. So I kind of had to redo my talk. So we'll be talking about both Aura as well as Lightning Web Components in this. So I wanted to kick this off really quick with a demo. Kind of a picture's worth 1,000 words, so maybe this demo is worth like 1,000,000 words, let's hope. So this is an app that I'm working on for a client, and it's kind of got some funny garbage data in here, but essentially what this is like, think of it as like an IT operations management kind of dashboard. You're looking at this thing, and there's some faulty projector, so I hope I'm not jinxing the projector in the room, but maybe the bulbs are burning out or something, and this app has kind of aggregated these into this major incident. There's like some really smart AI that's predicting this is going to be a major incident, and it's got a score. So you can kind of see up here we have like an outage probability, a risk score. So maybe there's like an agent sitting here looking at the screen, and the thing is going to change before their eyes. So what I've got here is my Salesforce app, which is simulating a back-end process that would be like running some AI on this. Maybe it's doing NLP on emails coming through with cases or some different types of algorithms there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to edit this thing on my phone, and we'll see an example of streaming API in action. It will change before your eyes. So we have these numbers. Basically, the first one is 0 to 100 outage probability. The second one is a risk score from 1 to 10. And so I would just like somebody to say, okay, this is a 1. What do we want it to go up to? Like something high, like 8, 9, 10. 8, okay. So I'm going to edit this record here. I'm going to change the score to 8. And hopefully we see it updated. Okay. And it gives you this alert toast. Data has changed. Risk score has been updated. So maybe the agent is sitting here looking at this. They're like, oh no, this thing is getting worse. What's the outage probability on this? So, the AI is kind of working in the background, and this is a 0 to 100 scale. So what will it go up to this time? 92. I like it. All right. So the idea here is that the agent's not sitting here refreshing this over and over again. It's giving them the relevant updates in real time. So it's just kind of a demo to describe a use case for using Streaming API. But actually, you might not always want to use Streaming API. So it's not always better to just have real-time data refreshing your screen all the time. Actually, sometimes you want to keep that static view for user experience. This auto refresh can confuse the user. So make sure the use case for Streaming API is adding value before doing it. Consider the UI, the UX, and you don't want to disorient the user. So I think what we saw there, the number would change from 1 to 9, I think we set it to, but it would also give them a message like letting them know it's changing. So I think you really have to think about the user experience when you're doing this. Also, we have Streaming API technologies plus Lightning Data Service. So Lightning Data Service is more just for the components you're seeing on the screen. I think this is a more accepted way to use this right now because if you're changing a value on the screen, you're changing it, and if it updates somewhere else, it kind of is a decent user experience. Whereas Streaming API is kind of this back end, could confuse the user. So there's more than one way to do this real-time stuff. But two of the common ways are short polling and long polling. So has anyone here used the action poller in Visualforce? This is kind of old now. Or in JavaScript, maybe window.setInterval, you can set it to some milliseconds. So these are two ways to do short polling. The reason they call them short polling, it's basically just running some loop like every few seconds, every 30 seconds, just doing a request and response on the server, like an AJAX call. And it's short polling because it's it's not keeping a connection open. It's doing a very short request and response, but it's having to do it very frequently, typically. Good thing about this is you kind of can multiplex all the different users doing it. You're not burning a lot of connections. Versus long polling, which actually we're going to talk about, focus on long polling today. Long polling is called long polling because it kind of reserves some resources on the server for a longer time. It's not just a quick request and response over and over again, but it's actually like a dedicated connection to that. And you know, the downside there is there's limits, right? So I think this is the main one to be careful of. How many concurrent clients across all channels for event types. So you might even hit this 20 if you're building it in a dev org. That's pretty easy to hit. So you might want to use short polling just because you have too many subscribers. But anyway, this is long polling. This is Comet D. This is like the empApi, you know, streaming API technologies that Salesforce gives us, platform events, all these types of things. So, you know, a little bit about these different types, right? Push topics, generic, platform, change data capture, and then lightning data service kind of. You know, there's different nuances to all of these. There's some similarities, some differences. The push topic, you know, this example, this is going to show us when any opportunity changes to $1 million or greater, or you're inserting an opportunity that's $1 million or greater. So you're kind of conditionally subscribing to some opportunity data. Generic and platform are similar, but generic can be like any arbitrary payload, whereas platform event, you know, it's kind of like a custom object, _E with strongly typed data types inside the payload. Change data capture, you just turn this on for an object and it publishes any changes. And then lightning data service is, you know, front end only. And this is just a chart ripped from Salesforce help docs. But these are basically kind of a pros and cons of the different mechanisms. So, you know, how do you choose? Do I use a push topic? Do I use platform event? You can kind of look like there's one here, subscribe via Apex triggers. If you want to do that, you have to use a platform event. So you can see this matrix is kind of all over the place. All these technologies have different strengths and weaknesses. So what I'm going to show you today are 3 methods for subscribing to data in Lightning. So this doesn't matter if it's any of these methods. These will all work with what I'm going to show you. But how do you implement them? So there's a very, very nice Aura component called Lightning empApi. So how many folks have used this? Okay, so if you want to build a real-time app, this is like really the way to go. This is like very easy to use. It takes a very complex thing and simplifies it for you. I give this the big happy face. You'll love using it. But you know, how do you do this with Lightning Web Components? So this component is not available directly for Lightning Web Components yet. Hopefully it will be soon in the future, but there's 2 different use cases for Lightning Web Components. So as you may know, you can include a Lightning Web Component inside of an Aura component. So you can, if your app is already sort of this hybrid structure, you can just continue to use Lightning empApi, and you can bind you know, the response of this into some variables that push into a public reactive property of the Lightning Web Component. So you get all this Lightning empApi goodness pushed down through your Lightning Web Component. The only downside is you have to use Aura also, and maybe that's not the way you want to build your app. But so I give this one like still kind of a happy face. It's pretty easy to use. And then there's a pure Lightning Web Component solution. So this one I give like an okay face. You actually have to use the Comet D library directly. And this is I wouldn't say the workaround, but this is the big implementation you have to do. Actually, before they built this component and before even Lightning, when we were using Visual Force, this was the way you would have to implement it. Thankfully, this works on Lightning Web Components with just a couple small tricks that we have to do there. So let's show you how to do those things. So I've got another org here. It's just kind of a developer org. It's not like an app like I was showing you before. And I'm just going to open up a little side-by-side here. Maybe we can get some audience interaction. So what I've got is the first example that I mentioned, which is a pure Lightning, an Aura Lightning component, empApi implementation. It's the simplest. And I'm just going to publish a platform event to the bus that this thing is listening for. So if we go to execute anonymous, we can see event bus.publish, a new list of hello world events, which is a very simple platform event I defined that has a message property with some message. So does somebody want to give me a message to put in here?
Peter is awesome.
Peter?
Is awesome.
Peter is awesome. And which Peter is that?
XYZ.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to execute this. And we see the message, right? So that's kind of the power of this. I'm not touching this screen right here. This screen is listening through Comet D long polling, through streaming API for this change, right? This is a totally separate. This could be even another user firing this thing. So we can just keep, putting different messages in here, and they're going to show up. So this is the same sort of technology behind the demo I showed you earlier. So what if you want to use a Lightning Web Component? So right here what we have is we have an Aura app, an Aura tab with this I am a Lightning Web Component embedded inside. We can do the same thing. Any messages from the audience?
Who is Peter?
Who is Peter? All right, works similarly, right? We can just keep putting these messages in, executing them. Okay. So the pure Lightning Web Component solution. All right. So we'll see if this one works. This is the most complex. Any suggestions for a message here? Oops, I think I accidentally hit escape. All right, there we go. So these were the three different things I showed you earlier. Now let's take a look at the code for these. So can we see this? Maybe. How's it look? I think it has a presentation view, but it's a little tricky to navigate. Let me know, somebody holler if you can't see something, but it's fairly simple. So the first one, all we have to do is include empApi up here in our component markup, and then some variable to hold the messages. So we've got a string array called messages. This is just iterating through the messages and displaying them one per line. If we go to the controller, this is where it's a little more interesting. This is the JavaScript controller and an Aura component. So ultimately, we have the empApi.subscribe method. We have to pass in some things. The channel we're subscribing to, the replay ID. There's an anonymous function here which just says you subscribe to the function. Subscribe to the channel. The important thing is, a couple important things. So one of these, this is the channel we're subscribing to. So /event/hello world _e. But as I said, we can subscribe to all these technologies with this. So this is the syntax for subscribing to a platform event. If we wanted to subscribe to change data capture, this is what it would look like. It's /data _ change event. If we want to subscribe to a push topic, it's /topic and then the topic name. Or if we want to do the generic streaming, it's /u and then the name of the event. So any of this code would look pretty much the same no matter which streaming technology we're using. I will mention one caveat here. If you're subscribing to a platform event or many of these technologies other than maybe change data capture, you need to do some filtering because you might build your app in a way that's on a single record, but you're subscribing to what could be any record changing. So you don't want to just automatically display changes for any record in a given record, right? You want to make sure it is the record ID that's changing match the record ID I'm on. And you do get record IDs with change data capture, but if you're doing a platform event and it's record specific, you might want to make sure you include the record ID in the message. Like the demo I showed you changing the score and the probability, you wouldn't want that to change for the wrong major incident that you happen to be looking at. So that's the code for that, pretty straightforward. We're just handling the event and pushing the message into our array of messages, and that's how you saw them kind of working their way down the screen. The other one that's slightly more complex is when we have a Lightning Web Component embedded inside an Aura component. So that's this one here. The outside is pretty much the same, but you can see down inside we're embedding a Lightning Web Component inside this with the C, I called it listen for hello. It's listening for hello world. So all the stuff around this is the same, right? It's still the same controller listening on a channel and updating this message array with messages. But you can see what we've done. Instead of rendering them in here, we've actually bound to v.messages. And this message is a reactive public property of this Lightning component, listen for hello. So if we open the listen for hello component, we can see now we're in Lightning Web Component syntax, right? We've got a template for each iterating over messages and rendering those. And if we look at the JavaScript for this, we can see where we displayed, we can see where we declared this reactive, API is the public, so we can actually pass something in, but fairly simple overall. So if you need to use streaming technologies and you have a hybrid app with some, pretty much anywhere, I think you can, it doesn't have to be the parent, it can be somewhere in the app. You could have something like an event bubble up to the top and then push back down to the Lightning Web Component. Just kind of somewhere in the tree there you can use this technique. Okay, so this perhaps is the most interesting example here. So this is the pure Lightning Web Component implementation. I hadn't seen anybody that had solved this before, so it's just one of those puzzles I really wanted to solve. So the first thing you'll notice here is a whole bunch of imports, right? So this is the import syntax for static resources for the most part. I think there's also an import for a Apex method that we're calling, but we're importing all these static resources, and what we're doing is we're loading 3 of them in parallel. So we need to load CometD, jQuery, JSON2. These are actually libraries that were mentioned on Salesforce developer blogs a long time ago for using this in Visualforce, and come to find out they still work in Lightning Web Components. So we load these 3 in parallel, and when they're done, we load the jQuery CometD because it obviously depends on both jQuery and CometD. So this is like 4 static resources loading in the proper order. And then we get into this like somewhat complex JavaScript, which is calling the CometD library directly. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm not going to go into much detail here, but this is sort of adapted code from, I think it might be adapted from like ES5 to ES6 to get it to work in Lightning Web Components. with some other changes. But one of the important things to notice here is that, you know, part of the Comet D configuration requires the session ID, right? How do you get that? So I was pleased to find out, I don't know if anybody's tried this, but maybe you've tried to use Apex to get a session ID with Aura components and call an API and notice it didn't work. I was expecting this not to work, but it does. So, you know, I've got this utils class that just returns user info dot gets session ID, and providing that actually is valid in Lightning Web Components. So we're able to, using the Comet D library directly, even though we don't have empApi, we're able to subscribe to any streaming technologies on Salesforce in a Lightning Web Component. I don't have too much time, but what I've done is I've posted this code in GitHub, so you can take a look at it. If you need to implement some streaming solution in Lightning Web Components, it should be valuable for you there. So I just have some resources here. Which streaming event do I use? What is change data capture? The streaming API developer guide, and then my GitHub repo here. And I've posted the slides with, you know, these clickable links on SlideShare. And so after the session, I'll just tweet a link. You can get the slides and the code there. All right, I think we may have a few minutes here for questions. Yes?
You mentioned you like to filter the events you get back.
Mm-hmm.
Restrict what you actually subscribe to, or do you have to get everything and sort of filter it?
You can restrict. So I would say it just kind of depends. You know, like the push topic, for instance, generally, I mean, you could filter it to like something as small as an ID, but the problem is you can only have so many push topics. So you'll generally do kind of a medium granularity. You'll filter it on some bigger condition. So you'll get back, you know, a subset. You won't get back your whole database every time, but it'll be like filtered a little bit, then you have to filter a little bit more. You know, you could define events in a way that are very, very granular. But you can see this is probably why Salesforce, I've heard rumors of Safe Harbor, something called Live Record, which is going to give you the technology to subscribe sort of like Lightning Data Service, but with back-end changes. I'm thinking it's probably pretty chatty and expensive in general to do this kind of thing. Maybe that's why maybe there'll be like an extra charge to do it or something, I don't know. But yeah, basically everybody that's got a browser open is subscribing to all these things and filtering them, so. Okay, thanks. Any more questions?
Any timelines on empApi for Lightning Web Components? Have you heard anything?
I haven't heard anything. If you go to their developer, it's, you know, their, what is it called? The kind of the reference there with all the component specs. You can see it's up there, but it's grayed out. So, you know, the view Lightning Web Components grayed out. So presumably they might turn that on at some point, but I don't know. Yeah, I think there's a lot of gaps like that we'll see close up, releases to come. All right, well, I've got some stickers up here if you want any, either for the company that I work for, Robots and Pencils, and I'll be around afterwards if you want to ask me any questions personally or grab a business card or something like that. So thanks everybody for having me, and thanks to the sponsors for helping put this thing on.